You've been lied to about the pyramids your entire life, and I'm not talking about ancient aliens or secret chambers filled with treasure. I'm talking about something way more shocking. The way they were actually built, who built them, and why they exist in the first place. Everything you learned in school? Yeah, most of it is completely wrong. And by the end of this video, you're going to see these ancient structures in a completely different way. So here's the thing. The Great Pyramid of Giza is one of the most famous structures on Earth. It's been standing there for over 4,500 years. And yet, despite all the technology we have today, despite all the research and studies, we still can't fully explain how it was built. But what's even crazier is that the stuff we think we know about it. Most of it is based on assumptions, guesses, and honestly some pretty lazy thinking from historians who just repeated what someone else said without questioning it. Let me start with the biggest lie you've been told. You probably think slaves built the pyramids, right? That's what movies show us. That's what we heard in history class. Thousands of slaves being whipped and forced to drag massive stones across the desert under the burning sun. It's a powerful image, it's dramatic, and it's completely false. Archaeologists have found the actual village where the pyramid workers lived. And guess what? These weren't slaves. They were paid workers. They had proper housing, medical care, and they were fed really well. We're talking about massive amounts of meat, bread, and beer. These workers were eating better than most people in ancient Egypt. They were skilled laborers, not prisoners. They were proud to be building something for their pharaoh. In fact, some of the workers even left graffiti inside the pyramid showing the names of their work crews. They had team names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure. Does that sound like slave labor to you? But here's where it gets even more interesting. The whole idea that slaves built the pyramids didn't even come from ancient Egypt. It came from Greek historians who visited Egypt thousands of years after the pyramids were built. They saw these massive structures and just assumed slaves must have built them because that's what made sense to them based on their own culture. And then that story got repeated over and over until it became fact. Even the Bible mentions Israelite slaves building structures in Egypt, which led to even more confusion. But historians now agree that there's zero evidence linking Hebrew slaves to pyramid construction. The timeline doesn't even match up. Now let's talk about how these pyramids were actually built. Because this is where things get really mind-blowing. The Great Pyramid is made up of about 2.3 million stone blocks. Each block weighs between 2 and 15 tons. Some of the granite blocks in the king's chamber weigh up to 80 tons. And they had to move these blocks from quarries that were hundreds of miles away in some cases. How did they do it without cranes, trucks, or modern machinery? For years, people said they used wooden logs as rollers. But here's the problem. Egypt didn't have many trees. And the ones they did have weren't strong enough to support multi-ton blocks. So that theory doesn't really work. Then people said they used ramps. They built long ramps up the side of the pyramid and dragged the stones up. But if you do the math, a ramp that could reach the top of the Great Pyramid would need to be over a mile long and would require more material than the pyramid itself. That doesn't make sense either. So what did they actually do? Recent discoveries suggest they used a combination of techniques. They might have used internal ramps that spiraled up inside the pyramid as they built it. They also used water. Yes, water. They would pour water on the sand in front of the sledges carrying the stones. This made the sand firm and reduced friction by up to 50%. Scientists tested this and it actually works. The Egyptians were way smarter than we give them credit for. But here's something that'll really mess with your head. The precision of the Great Pyramid is insane. The base of the pyramid is almost perfectly level. We're talking about an error of less than 2 centimeters across a base that's over 230 meters long. The 4 sides are aligned almost exactly with the cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. The accuracy is within 0.05 degrees. How did they do that without compasses or GPS? They used the stars. They tracked the movement of specific stars and used that to align the structure. But even with that knowledge, the level of precision they achieved is something that would be difficult even with modern tools. And here's another thing nobody talks about. The Great Pyramid was originally covered in smooth white limestone casing stones. These stones were polished so well that the pyramid would have gleamed in the sun like a giant mirror. It would have been visible from miles away. Imagine seeing that in the middle of the desert. It would have looked like something from another world. But over the centuries, earthquakes and looters stripped away most of these casing stones. People used them to build other structures in Cairo. So what we see today is basically the rough inner core of the pyramid. It's like looking at a building with all its finished walls ripped off. Now let's talk about why the pyramids were built. You probably think they were just giant tombs for pharaohs, right? And yeah, that's partially true. But there's so much more to it. The pyramids weren't just about giving a dead king a nice place to rest. They were about power, religion, and making a statement to the entire world. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was considered a living god. When he died, he was supposed to join the other gods in the afterlife. But for that to happen, his body needed to be preserved, and he needed a proper place for his spirit to reside. The pyramid was basically a machine for resurrection. It was designed to help the pharaoh's soul ascend to the heavens. The shape of the pyramid itself was symbolic. It represented the rays of the sun coming down to earth. The pharaoh would climb these rays to reach the sun god Ra. But it was also about showing off. Building a pyramid required massive resources. It required organizing thousands of workers, feeding them, housing them, and coordinating a construction project that lasted decades. If you could build something like that, you were showing the entire kingdom and all your enemies that you had power. You had control. You had wealth. It was ancient propaganda on a scale we can barely imagine. Here's something else that's wild. The three main pyramids at Giza, the pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, are aligned with the three stars in Orion's belt. This isn't a coincidence. Orion was associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians believed that when you died, your soul would travel to the constellation of Orion. So they built the pyramids to mirror the stars. They were literally building a map to the afterlife right there on the ground. And if you think that's crazy, there's more. The shafts inside the Great Pyramid that lead from the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber aren't just random tunnels. They're precisely angled to point at specific stars. One shaft points to the star Sirius, which was associated with the goddess Isis. Another points to the star Thuban, which was the North Star at the time the pyramid was built. These weren't ventilation shafts like some people thought. They were spiritual pathways for the pharaoh's soul to travel through. But here's where things get controversial. Some researchers have claimed that there are hidden chambers inside the Great Pyramid that we haven't discovered yet, and they might be right. In recent years, scientists used cosmic ray imaging technology to scan the pyramid. And they found evidence of a large void above the Grand Gallery. Nobody knows what's in there yet. It could be nothing. It could be a structural feature. Or it could be a hidden chamber that's been sealed for over 4,000 years. The Egyptian government has been hesitant to drill into the pyramid to find out because they don't want to damage it. So for now, it remains a mystery. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get mentioned enough. The pyramids weren't built in isolation. When you visit Giza, you see the pyramids and the Sphinx, and it's easy to think that's all there was. But there was an entire city around these structures. There were temples, causeways, harbors on the Nile, workers' villages, and cemeteries. The whole area was a massive complex dedicated to the afterlife of the pharaohs. And all of this was built during a period we call the Old Kingdom, which lasted from around 2686 to 2181 BC. This was Egypt's golden age. This was when they had the resources and the stability to pull off these insane construction projects. But here's something most people don't realize. After the Old Kingdom ended, the Egyptians stopped building pyramids like this. They tried a few more times, but they were never able to match the scale or precision of the Giza pyramids. It's like they lost the knowledge or the ability to do it. Later, pyramids were smaller, less precise, and many of them collapsed or fell apart. The Great Pyramid of Giza remained the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years, until the Lincoln Cathedral was built in England in 1311. Think about that. For almost 4,000 years, nothing humans built came close to matching it. So why did they stop? Some historians think it was because building pyramids was just too expensive. It drained the economy. It required too many resources and too much labor. After a while, the pharaohs realized they could build smaller tombs in hidden locations like the Valley of the Kings and use the saved resources for other things like military campaigns and trade. But some researchers think there's more to it. They think the knowledge of how to build these massive structures was closely guarded and passed down through a small group of architects and engineers. When that knowledge was lost or those people died without passing it on, the ability to build pyramids at that scale disappeared. There's also a theory that the climate changed. The Sahara Desert wasn't always as dry as it is today. During the time the pyramids were built, the area had more vegetation and water. Moving massive stones and feeding thousands of workers would have been easier. But as the climate shifted and the desert expanded, large-scale construction projects became more difficult. Here's another thing that blows my mind. The Great Pyramid is aligned so precisely with true north that modern architects still study it. The four sides of the base are almost perfectly equal in length. The difference between the longest and shortest side is only about 4 centimeters. That's insane for a structure built over 4,500 years ago using copper tools and rope. And remember, this thing is massive. It's about 146 meters tall, though it's lost about 9 meters from the top over time. The base covers an area of about 5.3 hectares. That's about 13 acres or roughly 10 football fields. And here's something that'll make you question everything. Some researchers have pointed out that the Great Pyramid's dimensions encode mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height is very close to 2 pi, and the slope angle of the pyramid's sides is close to the golden ratio. Now, some people think this is proof that the ancient Egyptians had advanced mathematical knowledge that we didn't think they had. Others think it's just a coincidence that resulted from the building techniques they used. But either way, it's fascinating. Let me tell you about another massive misconception. Most people think the pyramids are in the middle of nowhere, deep in the desert, far from civilization. That's not true at all. The pyramids are literally on the edge of Cairo. You can stand next to a Pizza Hut and see the pyramids right there in the background. The modern city has expanded so much that it's basically reached the ancient monuments. This has caused a lot of problems with pollution and preservation, but it also shows you that these structures were built near where people lived. They were part of the landscape, not isolated monuments in the middle of nowhere. And speaking of preservation, the pyramids are under threat. Air pollution from Cairo is eating away at the remaining limestone. Groundwater levels are rising, which is causing salt to seep into the stone and damage it from the inside. Tourism, while important for Egypt's economy, also causes wear and tear. Millions of people visit every year, and all those footsteps and hands touching the stones add up. There are ongoing efforts to preserve the pyramids, but it's a constant battle against time and the elements. Here's something else that's rarely discussed. The workers who built the pyramids left behind evidence of their daily lives. Archaeologists have found bakeries that could produce thousands of loaves of bread per day to feed the workers. They found evidence of a brewery that produced beer, which was a staple drink in ancient Egypt because it was safer than water. They found the remains of cattle and fish that were brought in to feed the workforce. All of this shows that building the pyramids was a massive logistical operation that required planning and organization on a scale that's hard to imagine. There were also hospitals where injured workers were treated. Skeletons found in the workers' cemetery show evidence of broken bones that healed, which means they received medical care. Some workers had amputations that they survived, which shows a level of medical knowledge that's pretty impressive for the time. These people weren't disposable slaves. They were valued workers who were taken care of. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Ancient aliens. Some people genuinely believe that humans couldn't have built the pyramids and that aliens must have helped. This theory became popular in the 1960s and 70s and has been pushed by TV shows and books ever since. But here's the thing. This theory is not only wrong, it's also kind of insulting to the ancient Egyptians. It assumes that ancient people were too primitive to accomplish great things on their own. But the evidence shows that they absolutely could and did build these structures using intelligence, planning, trial and error, and a massive amount of hard work. We have evidence of quarries where the stones came from. We have tools they used. We have written records about pyramid construction. We have the workers' village. We have everything we need to understand how this was done. Just because it's impressive doesn't mean it's impossible or that it required alien intervention. The ancient Egyptians were smart, resourceful, and determined. They had time, they had manpower, and they had a strong motivation to honor their god-king. That's all they needed. But I'll admit, there are still mysteries. We don't know exactly how they lifted the heaviest stones into place. We don't fully understand all the techniques they used. There are still questions about the internal structure and whether there are undiscovered chambers. And that's okay. Not everything needs to be fully explained for us to appreciate how incredible these structures are. The fact that they're still standing after 4,500 years is a testament to the skill and knowledge of the people who built them. The pyramids have survived earthquakes, sandstorms, looters, and the passage of time. Empires have risen and fallen. Languages have been forgotten and new ones created. The world has changed beyond recognition. And yet, the pyramids remain. They're a connection to a past that feels impossibly distant and yet still present. When you stand in front of one of these structures, you're looking at something that was ancient when the Romans walked the earth. You're seeing something that was already over 2,000 years old when Jesus was born. That's hard to wrap your head around. So yeah, everything you thought you knew about the pyramids, most of it was probably wrong or at least incomplete. They weren't built by slaves. They weren't just tombs. The construction methods were way more sophisticated than rolling logs and ramps. The precision is mind-blowing, and the purpose went far beyond just housing a dead king. These were cosmic machines, religious monuments, and displays of power all rolled into one. The ancient Egyptians accomplished something that still amazes us thousands of years later. They created structures that have outlasted entire civilizations. And they did it with copper tools, rope, wooden sledges, water, sand, human ingenuity, and a whole lot of determination. That's the real story of the pyramids. And honestly, it's way more impressive than any myth or conspiracy theory. If this changed how you see ancient history, hit that subscribe button. Retry,